Here's the interesting thing. In 2009, going back to probably about 2005, I was protesting outside SIFs, and I had an agreement, and I will mention names for this purpose, with Ruth Dyson that I would stop protesting, providing I was the first person to go before what was to be the new complaint system. Thus, the Chief Executive Advisory Panel come in, and I was the first person to ever go before, and I had a win. In 2000, everything broke down from that point because I found there was repercussions for having gone before the panel. So back in 2012, I got back before the Chief Executive Advisory Panel a second time. Once was bad enough, it should never have needed to go before them again. A second time. We equally had a reasonably favourable outcome, and then I applied for a third Chief Executive Advisory Panel hearing because again the staff wouldn't honour the agreement, and by then the person that I was going to them about had aged out of care, and they said they're out of care, you're not going to get a third hearing. And see, so my point is, even when the Chief Executive Advisory Panel decides something should be done, it would appear the staff just don't want to do it.
But hang on, one of the reasons we're complaining is to get justice. Number two, we're trying to make sure that the bad eggs in the system, the bad social workers, are outed. We don't want bad social workers. We want the good ones, right?
Well,
and you are never going to get rid of the bad social workers by going through the complaints process. No. Because the system isn't going to hold them to account.
As Barry found out, part of the process is there is a theory that if they make it hard enough for long enough, most people would give up and go away. Barry's done it for 7 years. I've been fighting them for longer than that. A case that went before Parliament twice by the name of Vivian Needham, she'd been doing it for 7 years. It's a long battle. It's draining.
7 years? It seems to be 7 years a common number, isn't it?
7 years does seem
well, I'm never giving up.
They try to narrow you down to little issues.
But you've got to understand, the law is only a set of rules for the average.
Yeah, only for us, not for them. That's the way they see it.
Well, if you are an employee in New Zealand, you have to comply to the law. Mm-hmm. And it's up to the chief executive to make sure that those employees comply to the law. And if she isn't doing it, she's got to go. And if she isn't being supported that this is lawful by the minister, then she's got to go. Mm. You know, these people work for us. Mm. It's our taxpayers' money. Mm. We can cause mayhem and havoc as citizens if we can join together.
It's interesting you talk about that, because one significant event that a lot of people don't remember is, I think it was 1989, because Dr. John Angus talked about it, when they changed from becoming public servants to state servants, everything got turned on its head. And there was a focus that changed where the people who used to serve us, supposedly, that become known to them that they were there to serve the state and not us. And there's a big whole change around. So it may sound like a little thing.
It's massive.
But as soon as you change something from a public servant to a state servant, that's a whole different focus. And from 1989 onwards, well actually that started before then, but that's when it became official, probably started in the 1980s, the whole thing got turned on its head. And we ended up battling the very people who were supposedly there to serve us.
Why do you think New Zealand is such a toxic place to live in at present? Because the citizens are not happy.
Absolutely.
I mean, look at this election. It's a wonderful set of Sesame Street going on, with Mr. Muller resigning, with so many small parties kicking in, with New Zealand First under serious pressure because they haven't delivered for the people. I mean, New Zealand First was there for the people, and they haven't done that. they've complained about immigration for how many years?
Yeah,
Right?
20.
And we've had record numbers of immigration.
I'll give you one example of how a concept might sound good, and to start with it is, let's take family group conferences.
Yeah.
I call them foregone conclusions because and this is how it works. This is how the original idea of the FGC, when you read it, was a brilliant idea, but the bureaucrats got a hold of it and completely turned it round to their own advantage. Now, when you can predetermine things like this, the day of the FGC, so you can rule in and rule out who you want there and who you don't want there, the information that can be given to the FGC, and also choose to invite or not to invite or to lose invitations of people you don't want there, you predetermine the outcome. So I call FGCs foregone conclusions. We coined that phrase way back in the mid-1980s. And even with family court, I call it CAUGHT with a dollar sign. Because once you're caught in it, you better have a lot of money. And people will say, oh yeah, well, the fact is, if you have a reasonable lawyer, you may possibly have a chance. But even then you're not guaranteed it because of ipsi dixit. And what that means for people that don't know is if I put an affidavit into the family court, it's taken as truth because I've said it, ipsi dixit. And with the any evidence rule, it's very hard to defute something that didn't happen when someone says it did happen, because you don't have any proof that it didn't happen, because it didn't happen for there to be no proof that it didn't happen. Mm-hmm. Now, people might think that's a load of claptrap. That's a reality and the stupidity you're up against. If I say something about Steve, for example, put it in an FGC, and Steve says, no, I refute that, it never happened, and I say, well, on this day, it did happen, Steve can't prove it didn't happen because it didn't happen, and there's no proof because it didn't happen.
Can't prove
and this
negative.
is the craziness that people need to realise. Now, people will say to me, you're dreaming. Well, I've seen it happen in the family court. And I'll give you one example of the kind of thing I have seen. There was this particular case I was dealing with where they didn't like a father. So what they did is they went to the mother and said, oh, what we need you to do is we need you to put in an affidavit saying that he's abusive to you and go for a protection order.
So they'll
and she said, why would I want to do that? For two reasons. Because by putting in the protection order, you get legal aid for it. He has to pay for it because he's not legal aided. And also, when a family court judge reads that the father has a protection order, there's no way he's going to put kids with him. Who is going to want to put kids with a guy who's been accused of beating his wife? Not going to happen. So by default, you've already predetermined the outcome by applying for the protection order. Now, here's a good example. I knew someone who had a protection order against him, and they got it well and truly kicked out of court. But the fact it was kicked out of court didn't matter to the judge. The fact that the protection order was applied for was enough for them to say, no, well, you can lose on technical grounds in any number of ways. But I tend to believe the affidavit, even though the protection order wasn't of a level to be agreed to. You were just under the threshold, but you can't prove that you're not violent. So, I mean, how do you? It's like shadowboxing.
Everybody has the
protection orders
to be violent.
are abused, and the judges accept them all day. I notice now there's more and more men applying for protection orders against their wives.
Good.
Now, here's an interesting another case I'll tell you about. And this one was in the media. I can't name the person. He had a protection order filed against him without notice on Friday. He lived down a cul-de-sac, and his partner moved down the cul-de-sac. Because he was filmed driving past her new house, he'd lived there for 7 years, she just moved in. She got the police and got him arrested. He got arrested for breach of protection order that he hadn't been served. He spent a night in jail. In the end, the guy got paid out $5,000 because they hadn't served him with a protection order. Here's the thing, when it came time for them to consider the protection order got dropped.
Yeah, and there's a lot of protection orders that are enforced that don't even exist.
Here's the ironic thing about it. The other lawyer put into the affidavit that the person had been done for breach of protection order, which technically is correct, but he didn't mention that, first of all, the protection order hadn't been served. Second of all, when the protection order went to hearing, it wasn't upheld anyway. That wasn't in there. Just the fact that he did technically breach a protection order, he didn't know he'd been served. I mean, that's playing with things. The fact is, when the police realised their mistake, they released him from prison, and upon release they served him with a protection order that he should have got, that he was accused of breaching. And people will laugh about it, but it happens a lot.
And it's really dangerous.
It is, because whenever that guy goes for a job anywhere, one of the questions, even a firearms licence, they ask you if you've ever been trespassed or you've had a protection order. As a driving instructor, I get asked that as well. Whether or not it's been given to some jobs is irrelevant. The fact it's been applied for will be enough for you not to get a job.
Crazy.
Dangerous.
Yeah, it
What
is.
are some of the key things you'd like to talk about in your case? Because really this was actually supposed to be about your interview.
Otho. Yeah, no, I'm the Chief Executive's Advisory Panel. It just, words couldn't describe just how corrupt it is. The findings I received from them were all based on what staff had said, without any...
And you went to the New Zealand Human Rights Commission, didn't you, to...
No, I went to the Human Rights Review Tribunal.
Right.
I filed through them and asked them just to correct incorrect information about me. Yeah, they narrowed me down to the issues that only involve me, which are the only really ones that you can actually fight for. And it seems after all that I've been through, it seems a bit of a letdown that I was only able to say, oh, you've said this about me, it's incorrect, you've said that about me, it's incorrect. And they still wouldn't let me.
Do you believe, even after all you've been through, that there's justice in the justice system, really?
There is if you've got money.
Yeah. Checkbook justice.
It's quite simple. If you've got money, they won't come near you because they know you can fight them. If you haven't got any money, they're all in, boots and all. And they'll take any issue, like Graham's saying, about protection orders and whether they were legal and that. They'll take all that and drag you over here when the real issue's over here, and they'll drag you over there and you'll fight that for a year or two, and you'll come back to the main issue. Oh, but that was so long ago. Anything they can sidetrack you on, they will.
Is that to extenuate the conflict to make more money, do you think?
Of course.
Yes, exactly what it is on their part, and the other part is to wear you down.
Absolutely.
Anything that they can pick up on that you say, or that they say you did, they'll try and turn that into another battle over here, and you can win that one, but it might take you 1, 2, 3 years. Meanwhile, they go straight up the middle and do whatever they bloody want.
And so while you're not seeing your children, your mental health deteriorates, you get PTSD, you get all of those kind of things.
And your physical
financial health.
Yeah, yeah. But,
Isn't that abusive?
oh, hell yeah. A lot of people think, well, I wouldn't put myself in that position. I didn't. The child did.
Mm.
And just say, the child said something, so she wouldn't return home. Something she'd been told to by another relative in my case. He just wanted custody of her so he could get his hands on a little bit of extra money. But they were aware of it. They knew what they were doing. But no, it all came down to my behaviour. And when they didn't have anything, they just invented it. And then you're fighting that. Oh, they joke.
Now that you've suffered at the hands of the abuse of the state through its systems, where do you see human rights and natural justice?
They're in the gutter at the moment.
Would seem so.
Oh, yeah.
Human rights?
Yeah, right beside it. They just go out the window when you're involving Oranga Tamariki.
There's no human rights in human.
No human rights. Not for you, not for the children that they're supposedly protecting. The more of a mess they make, the more work they get. They love it.
And so you can't get rid of those bad social workers.
Well, they can get rid of the good ones because I suppose the good ones have a gutful and move out eventually.
That's right. So then you get a cesspool of evil
Dysfunctional.
people who are just there to destroy families.
Yep. And the bigger mess they make, the happier they are. They don't give a damn.
And now they're paid well.
Yeah, they don't give a damn about you, don't give a damn about your kids, don't give a damn about the law.
The issue I've got is how is it that they can continue to go and lie to the court, and the court doesn't hold them to account either?
Well, do we know this? Because a lot of that family court stuff is never released.
Sealed.
Do they not get caught? I've never been into a family court that's closed, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you
know
can
how to
get the
report
press
on
in there now, but it's difficult.
Yeah.
It's not as easy as it was.
Well,
And quite honestly, the media does not want to cover family court matters.
Well, it's not only that, even when they're in there, they're told what they can and can't report on, which makes it not worthwhile being in there, because you could sit in there for 4 hours, come out with two paragraphs, and that's hardly going to justify you having sat in there for 4 hours. One of the, if what you're saying is how do we fix it?
Well, first, before we go there, your view on natural justice, are we getting natural justice in the courts or the ministries that are supposed to be working for the citizens?
Well,
however, they don't anymore, they work for the state. So it's the citizens against the bureaucrats then, isn't it?
I'd suggest that you actually define natural justice for a start, so people know exactly what it is. And I can put up that thing you were showing as well.
Be helpful. Basically, natural justice is that you have a right to be heard in an unbiased setting, in a neutral setting, and in an independent one, where basically no one has an axe to grind. So,
but hold on a second, when you go to the family court, it's a David and Goliath situation.
Yes.
You are the parent trying to protect your child. You're up against social workers, psychologists, maybe New Zealand police are involved, maybe DHBs are involved, maybe the education board's involved, witnesses, all employed by the state, and a judge employed by the state.
yep, no, that can very much be like that. I've known people to spend 50 and 60,000 basically to defend themselves to the right to be parents on the most spurious of claims. I mean, some of them...
Isn't that a breach of your basic human rights?
Well, you would think so, but there was a case that came up, Louise and Craig Martin, and they attempted to sue SIFs because basically their child was uplifted from them and died of cot death.
Ooh.
And
that must be devastating.
That's terrible.
It absolutely was. And the judge in the end, and this is the ironic thing, decided that Children and Family only had potentially had a duty of care to the child, albeit tragically died. The other argument I gather behind it was, well, that could have happened whether it was in state care or the parents' care, because cot death you just never know.
But that's not relevant.
No, I wouldn't think it was relevant, and I don't think it justifies what happened either. So basically the judge ruled that the organisation had no duty of care to the parents or anyone else. And that's the kind of ruling which creates mayhem for everyone else, because then they think, well, we can basically do what we want to anyone else, and we can't be called to account, and to a large degree that's correct.
So there's no justice in the family court.
Oh, I've seen very little of it. I've been an advocate since 1989, and I have seen the family court do some good work, but that's often in the easy cases where someone's on the bad spectrum, and by that I mean they're a drug abuser, drug user,
We accept.
Yep.
If you're on methamphetamine, the children should be removed.
Yep.
If you have mental health issues, the children should be removed. If you have domestic violence, which is out of control, children should be removed.
And then they're the easy cases. It's the ones where he said, she said, might have happened, might not have happened, and they're the more difficult cases. And I'll give you one example of a conversation. One of the social workers, when I first started out, went up to one of the people and said, oh, look, there's a little bit of a problem here, so what we need you to do is we need you to say that you believe someone in the family is likely to hurt this child, because we want to get to the child before it's hurt. So they preempted a complaint that would never have happened. And so their argument behind it is, oh well, even if we've been jumped the gun a bit, we've potentially saved the child from being hurt, and isn't that... That's
but
how
they
they
made
justify it. Yeah. A white lie. A lie is a lie. White one, grey one. It's
It's
a lie.
perjury in front of the court.
Well,
And that's illegal. It's a breach of the Crimes Act.
I'll give you another example.
Section 108.
There was a social worker who, after visiting a family, went around the corner to ring 0508 family to make an anonymous complaint about the family they'd been, with all sorts of allegations, so they could then come back, investigate and uplift the child. And that's a problem with a system that allows anonymous complaints. I mean, I agree with what one World War II veteran said to me. He said that's a kind of Hitlerish behaviour that he allowed, where you could put your neighbour And
Yeah.
and the person who made the complaints never known and never held to account. And when you start allowing that to happen on a regular basis,
Was
you're
it 100 and how many? 158,000 complaints a year?
you're opening it
And
up
not to
for,
mention
abuse.
COVID now.
Oh yeah.
Now that to tell on your neighbour if he's out not abiding.